Mírame, está presente. Por favor, se siente, mírame, está presente. Estamos la gente, se siente, mírame, está presente. Se siente, mírame, está presente. Ahí siempre para adelante, siempre para adelante. Se siente, mírame, está presente. Se siente, mírame, está presente. Se siente, mírame, está presente. Que venga, venga, venga ahora. Canta mi gente. Se siente, mírame, está presente. Canta, canta ahora. Canta mi gente. Se siente, mírame, está presente. Ahí para los panderos y canta mi gente. Se siente, mírame, está presente. Oye, ahora canta mi gente. Se siente, mírame, está presente. Ahora sí con mi pena y mi gente. Se siente, mírame, está presente. Ay, porque somos boricua valiente. Se siente. Ay, ahora sí, se canta mi gente.
Se siente.
Así mismo. Alegría plena para toda mi gente. Se siente, Irán está presente. Hay un buen querido como Irán, nunca se olvidaré. Se siente, Irán está presente. Hoy canta la gente. Se siente, Irán está presente. Porque Irán está aquí hoy y está presente. Se siente, Irán está presente. Escucha ahora, Irán está presente. Se siente, Irán está presente. Levántate, boricua valiente. Se siente, Irán está presente. Como lo quería como lo quería Se siente, Irán está presente. Ahora sí. Se siente, Irán está presente. Escuchar esta plena para te canta mi gente. Está presente, se siente, Irán está presente. Se siente, Irán está presente. Irán está presente, Irán está presente. Ahora sí. Irán está presente. Ahí levanta mi gente. Irán está presente. Irán está presente. Irán está presente. Ahí va mi gente. Irán está presente. Irán está presente. Irán está presente. Ahora sí. Irán está presente. Irán está presente. Voy a cantar. Irán está presente. Irán está presente. Irán está presente. Somos gente. Irán está presente. 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 Oye mi gente, vamos para arriba, para la gente. Irán está presente. Ahora sí, para mi gente.
And now let's please welcome Patrick Sharpenell, Executive Director of el Museo del Barrio.
Hola. Hola. It is really special and moving to be celebrating the life and legacy of one of the most beloved members of our community, Maristany. El Museo del Barrio was founded in 1969 in the years of the civil rights movement, and the social justice is being always on the center of El Museo del Barrio's concerns. Doing this memorial is really doing justice. Justice to a human being that fought for justice, for representation, for Puerto Rican and Latino representation, and through his art, through his photographs, portrait the life and the life and all the kind of representations of the New Rican and Latino community. Barrio, welcome to El Museo del Barrio. I met HIram Memorial 4 years ago through Pedro Pedraza, and I was immediately shocked. Pedro. And I was immediately impacted, moved by his persona. He immediately inspired me and became a mentor who guided me in the work, in the day-by-day work of running the Museo del Barrio, and inspired me in understanding with more complexity what the community means, what social justice means, and all the things that we have to fight for. I would like to thank the amigos of Maristany. I would like to thank, obviously, Pedro Pedraza and Miguel Luciano. Calixto Chinchilla and Gama Valle for working so hard to organize this memorial. I would like also to thank very especially HIram Memorial family. Thank you for engaging and thank you for supporting this event. Now we're going to experience something really special. I would like to virtually introduce, I thought that the video was going to be on, Pedro Pietri, Puerto Rico Memorial honoring HIram Memorial. Bienvenidos y viva Puerto Rico!
They were always on time. They were never late. They never spoke back when they were insulted. They worked. They never went on strike about permission. They never took days off that were not on the calendar. They worked 10 days a week and were only paid for 5. They worked, they worked and they died. They died broke. They died owing. They died never knowing what the flood entrance of the First National City Bank looks like. Juan, Miguel, Milagro, Olga, Manuel, all died yesterday, today, and will die again tomorrow, passing their bill collectors on to the next of kin. All die waiting for the Garden of Eden to open up again under a new management. All die dreaming about America, waking them up in the middle of the night, screaming, Mira, your name is on the winning lottery ticket for $100,000. All die hating the grocery stores that sold them make-believe steak and bulletproof rice and beans. All die dreaming, hating, and waiting. Puerto Ricans who know they were Puerto Ricans. Download a big crack gold and commute free with life lived in the air. People do not live at all.
Director, Alita Maristany.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today. Hi. So, Sandy and Hiram was my beloved father. I just want to thank everyone for sharing in this celebration today. I'd like to thank the Friends of Hiram Maristany and El Museo for organizing this event. On March 10, 2022, in the final hours of my father's life, our last conversation was about hope. I asked some family and friends to please send me a short video message so I could show my dad and play for him. Ruthie, Betty, and James all sent encouraging messages. Hiram, we love you. We can't wait to see you again. Hiram, get well soon. We miss you. Hiram, I can't wait to see you. I'll have coffee waiting for you at La Fonda. As I played those videos, my father's eyes would peek open, and I knew that those messages lifted his spirits. After that, I continued to try and lift my father's spirits. Dad, just have hope that you'll get better. You don't have to have a lot of hope, just have a little hope, because a miracle can happen. Then I reminded my dad, remember you were in a street game called Miracles? I used to joke with him, couldn't you guys have found a more ferocious name for a street game? I told him, the Miracles doesn't sound very intimidating. It's like a music group. But I was just trying to make my father laugh. But within minutes of that conversation, my father's heart rate began to drop. I tell this story because the message of hope is how I would like my father to be remembered. In fact, if you look at his work, you will see that hope has been the underlying message throughout his life. My dad found hope in the most unlikeliest of places, everywhere. He found hope in the everyday lives of people living in East Harlem. He found hope in the Young Lord's Party, free health clinic, free breakfast program. He found hope in the Taíno ruins in Puerto Rico. He found hope in El Museo. He found hope at Hunter College. My dad could always find a little bit of hope. In short, I ask, when you remember my dad, please think of this message of hope and his ability to find hope everywhere. And that you, in turn, and myself, will be able to find hope within ourselves and share that hope with the world. The last thing I want to say is that Hiram's spirit is alive. And let me know if you can feel it. If you can feel it, let me know. Thank you. I feel my dad's spirit all the time, and as we saw the performance earlier, HIram está presente.
Special talent for photography, nothing Hiram owns is more important to him. Dan and Hiram decide to talk about it.
Did you ever talk to him about it? That it's missing? There's no way in hell, Dan, that camera, anybody else could have took it, man. No way in hell. But I know I keep it in the top drawer of your desk. Come outside. Why don't you come outside? Your real personal camera. It's been located. Come on, I'll tell you. Oh, boy. It's in a hot shot. I just think I'm trying to get it out. So you want to go there and get it? Did you report us telling you then? Oh, we never did. Oh, man. Good, let's go get it. Come on. I didn't report it either. That's an assumption. They can't go on. You know what I think? You know what I think he was saying? I think he was saying that whoever hacked the camera, took it, hacked it for $5, and we somehow recovered the plastic. Get that.
A lot of my work reflects dual realities and, to a certain extent, contradictory realities. In that image, you have both movement and stillness simultaneously. So when you look at the image, you see the spray, and you see some of the joy of being in a hydrant in a community that's 98 degrees, and the heat is everywhere, and this incredible spray of coolness. Anyone who is from East Harlem, anyone that sees that, they know immediately what's going on. I lived at 64 East Harlem 11th Street, and I lived on the ground floor. When I looked out of my window, I saw that hydrant every day of my life. East Harlem was a beautiful place because of what people were doing within that space. But there are people that I know that when they come here and they see this, they will feel included in the history of America. Because that's something that so many people take for granted. Truly, my work really reflects the love affair that I've had with my community. One day I think, hopefully I will do initiatives for young people are evolving artists to know their community, to preserve their community, and not allow someone else to do it for them. We have to take responsibility and title to our history.
Born and raised in El Barrio in East Harlem on 111th Street, Maristany is an indispensable and fiercely loyal member of this community. To speak on his impact, we invite Pedro Pedraza, a Museo trustee and former director of research at Centro, Melanie Maldonado, artist, activist, and scholar, and Amica Ortiz, filmmaker, to the stage.
I have to begin this tribute by saying I consider myself a very fortunate person because in my life it seems I was often lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. And so it was with my acquaintance and subsequent long 20-plus years of friendship with Hiram. When I met Hiram, he was going through a very dark period in his life, just having gone through a divorce, and he was unemployed. I knew of him when I met him then, but not much more than he was a former director of a museo. At this time, he was frequenting a small cafe near the corner of 107th and Lexington, down the street from the building where I lived. After informally being introduced to him, I began having conversations with him, and in one of these was concerning a small Centro book where I worked at the time, the Centro de Estudios Puertorriqueños, which was a short photographic history of the Puerto Rican community to New York City up until the 1950s. Hiram got very excited when he saw the book, and after reading a copy I gave him, he then told me he liked the book very much and that it was a type of quality work worthy of our community's history. He then said he felt strongly that this type of project needed to continue, and I told him, in fact, it was the intention of the Centro to produce an additional volume, bringing our story up to date
from the 50s to the 90s at that time. This was the early 2000s, I mean. Hiram immediately volunteered that he really had a lot of materials, photos, that he could offer to document such a book and would offer them to the center for such a purpose. He and I and Susana Lavalto Ruella actually started a project attempting to fulfill this goal with him, but it was halted due to lack of resources at the time. This short epitaph demonstrates for me something I would constantly see in Hiram's life and work, which was a concern for the human rights of self-determination, and especially as practiced via our own self-representation, either in art, history, or the social sciences. In terms of the greater New York Puerto Rican community, and especially for the East Harlem community, this concern was also the form of his community activism. And for Puerto Rico, his support for the independence of Puerto Rico and any decolonization project that led to the improvement of the standard of living for the people on the island was his call. Hiram was also always trying to improve his understanding of and effectiveness in promoting social justice. From the use of his digital technology and his photography to his understanding of the history of capitalism in the United States and its colonies and the role of social class in our social, cultural, political systems, especially how it interacts with race and gender in our daily lives. This is how he nurtured his always evolving political analysis of current events. Hiram showed this overriding concern for self-preservation and representation, even in what he considered the really important areas of acknowledgments for achievements, wherein the participation in a MoMA exhibition, Museum of Modern Art exhibition, that he was in this past November, was as important as being named the first recipient of an artist in residence position now just created at the Centro de Estudios Puertorriqueños. He called me 3 times to assure himself of being the first artist in residence ever for the Center for Puerto Rican Studies. I had to tell him that we always worked with artists, right from the very beginning of the Centro, in many ways. However, never was there an artist in residence program. And I have to let Yarimada and the Centro know how honored he really was to be named the first position, which is that of an artist in residence in the Center for Puerto Rican Studies. And he was to actually begin that position a week after his return from his vacation in Florida with me that he never actually returned from. Hiram was unflinching in his support and love for these institutions, working in terms of our self-determination that emerged out of the civil rights movement in general, but addressing the community in particular. Those were the Centro de Estudios Pequeños and el Museo del Barrio. The last, the Museo, was of concern, was of course the institution he was most deeply involved in, not as a founder, which was a wrong claim recently, and he will be the first to correct that error, but as a founding staff member of the Museo's reincarnation as an art institution emerging out of an educational program. Marco Moreno Vega being the person responsible for that. The first named institution, the Centro de Estudios Puertorriqueños, was the institution I was a part of as a founding staff member that emerged out of a student movement. Our experiences about the similarities and the efforts of to improve the socioeconomic position of our community in society, in New York especially, in 2 very, very different arenas, the art world and the academic world of social science. Although I think I knew more about the history of the Center than I did of the Museo, I think we were equally ignorant of each other's specialized topical areas our institutions functioned in. I won't say this. I was going to say, I didn't actually call him a Philistine, which he often called me, but Um, over and over again, too. So, um, let me see. I'm trying to find my space again. I think we were. Oh, okay. I didn't. I'm sorry. I'm lost my. It's okay. In the aftermath, I'll say. HIram, in the aftermath of all of this, HIram is a field of work and in connection to and intent. And I can't see. My eyes are tearing, so I can't. The connection and that's what I was saying in our practices and between the two institutions, and they were in the connection to rootedness of our work in the community, the privilege with institutions placed on the community and our organizations to guide and influence what and how we did and why we did it, the clear position we took that the institutions existed to serve the needs of the community and not of the professionals that populate these fields, and the clear goal that only through the elimination of social inequality, we can achieve the social justice we sought for our communities. The institutions did parallel work and each other unwittingly without collaboration and independently. We both were hoping that today, with the leadership of both institutions having committed to returning to much of the original vision and mission, there now was hope that the strength and power of collaboration between them, acknowledged as an entity now by both, that we would be able to see further progress in this area, in these areas. Possibility that perhaps a new day was on the horizon was for HIram one of the reasons why he felt so honored, excited, and eager to get into his new role as an artist in residence at the Central. I agree with him, and he almost made it. And he almost made it in his reality, and I hope we fulfill the promise of this collaboration with. I'm sorry, collaboration because of the success of this for the improvement of the conditions of our community, and that we honor that and we stay committed to that collaboration and build on it and improve it for the future. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Melanie Maldonado. I can't see. Our connection is an ancestral one. Like many, I knew his work before I knew his name. It was a photo of a Bomba matriarch from southern Puerto Rico that was my first connection to him. I learned his name the night before I gave it to her elderly descendants. The timing was nothing less than preordained. For years, we talked about everything from the mundane to the work and moments most precious in our lives. He always started a conversation intentionally with a, "Hey, how are you?" He was genuine and loyal and loved fiercely. And I knew this not because he told me whom he loved, but because he couldn't stop talking about them. His mother, his children, Alita and Pablo, his friends and comrades. The love of his life, though, had to be his community, El Barrio, the place he was born, lived, loved, and documented. He chose to walk its streets every day, remembering their memories and stories with his strides, indulging himself daily with smiles and nods and hellos of its people. At some point, he told me he wanted to go to Puerto Rico to see the island through the lens of my work as a cultural researcher and genealogist. And 6 months ago, we made it happen. We went to visit the area where his family lived in Mayagüez more than a century ago. Then we made our way down to Ponce, where we celebrated with a community lecture and historical site placard, the only complete body of photo documentation of a traditional baile de bomba, bomba dance, taken by him 50 years before. One of those images being the one I gave to an elderly descendant of one of those dancers years ago. Before we left Ponce, we drove over to La Gran Ceiba, a spiritual place where he had witnessed bomba practitioners engaged in an ancestral ceremonial act that he refused to document out of respect. When we went to that tree that held so many community memories and only encountered a literal shell of its trunk, he could not contain his emotion, as he told me he was grieving that loss, all that it represented. Today, I find myself with a similar sense of profound loss, but grateful for that and so many other memories. Thank you for it all, Hiram. May the drums resound in your honor as you watch over us, mighty ancestor.
Hello, everyone. First, I need to tell you that I will speak in Spanish. That's how Hiram and me used to talk every day, Spanish and Spanglish. Me siento muy honrado de que me hayan invitado a hablar sobre mi amigo Hiram. Una broma que teníamos entre nosotros era la de Hiram, the grumpy old man. Algunos de ustedes conocerán esa descripción de Hiram. But let me tell you something. He was no one fool. No. Se tomaba muy, muy en serio su amor por el barrio, su cultura, su historia y especialmente su gente, la gente del barrio. Pero entre nosotros, él era mi amigo y luego se convirtió en familia. Y nunca fue ese viejo gruñón conmigo, nunca. Nos queríamos y nos respetábamos mucho. La fonda era nuestra oficina. El lugar donde nos reuníamos regularmente. Cuando Hiram ahí aparecía, era muy seguro que los que andaban por allí me vieran llegar. Allí nos reuníamos. La primera vez que encontré a Hiram, y una semana después nos reunimos y me preguntó, como siempre hacía, ¿y qué te parece mi trabajo? Esa era como una prueba para ganar su confianza, ¿no? Y creo que la pasé con creces. Aprobé porque no le hablé sobre los aspectos técnicos, estéticos de su trabajo fotográfico, sino sobre el corazón y el alma del trabajo de Hiram. Y es que para mí ese era Hiram, se había convertido como el alma y el corazón del barrio, para mí. Las virtudes de amor, de lealtad y de orgullo por su herencia y por su propia carrera son los cimientos de la fotografía de Hiram Maristany. Yo era nuevo en Nueva York, un estudiante de y conocía poca gente aquí en el barrio. Hiram me adoptó y me presentó a muchos de sus queridos amigos aquí presentes, muchos de ellos. Nos reuníamos casi a diario y hablábamos todos los días. Se convirtió en mi mejor amigo, mi mentor y mi familia. Hablábamos mucho de todo tipo de temas, de tópicos, pero en especial mucho sobre fotografía. Fue un maestro natural que enriqueció la vida de muchos, lo cual le trajo muchas alegrías, eso lo sé. Y fue desinteresado cuando supo que tenía un individuo receptivo. Y ahí siempre dio y entregó mucho generosamente. Una historia que realmente muestra a HIram como hombre y como ser humano de principios sucedió el año pasado en el barrio. Hubo un altercado entre un grupo de jóvenes frente a un pequeño café puertorriqueño. Estos hombres bloquearon el frente de un café bebiendo y fumando jucas. Uno de los dueños les pidió que se movieran, lo cual provocó un exabrupto. Eran 2 contra 1, un desequilibrio de poder, un ejemplo de acoso y de violencia. Inmediatamente, HIram se puso de pie sin preocuparse por su propia seguridad, decidido a detener la violencia provocada por aquellos 2 tipos que golpeaban al dueño del café. Al ver a HIram entrar en acción, inmediatamente y sin pensarlo, me involucré. De ninguna manera HIram podía salir lastimado. Llamaron a la policía y eran amigos, los policías, de los alborotadores. Evitaron preguntarnos, indagar, no hicieron nada. HIram me dice, aquí hay algo raro y vamos a quedarnos aquí. Nos quedamos como testigos para corregir la narrativa. HIram no toleraría una injusticia. Este es uno de los muchos otros, de los muchísimos incidentes que demuestran el carácter humanitario de HIram Maristany y su firme creencia en la justicia social. Finalmente ahí no sucedió nada porque la familia puertorriqueña dueña del café también tenía un pariente en la policía que llegó y se presentó. Gracias a Dios. HIram se preocupaba por resolver las desigualdades y las injusticias. Fue leal a sus amigos, incluso hasta el final. Para él era muy importante apoyar a sus amigos y lo hacía aún sufriendo dolor e incomodidad. Me mostró eso en ocasión de una exposición de TAFA, que debe estar aquí presente, diciéndome, oye, si vas a ir hoy a lo de la exposición de TAFA, vamos juntos. Porque mira, es necesario apoyar a nuestra gente haciéndonos presentes. Y ese día nos fuimos a ver a TAFA, esperamos a que terminara la exposición y regresamos los 3 al barrio, muy tarde en la noche. HIram siempre habló con mucho cariño sobre su familia y sobre sus hijos, principalmente, a los que conocí a través de la historia que me contaba HIram. Habló con gran interés de que su obra y legado pasaran a sus hijos, esperando que ellos mantengan vivo su espíritu, devoción, amor por el a través de su fotografía. Esta responsabilidad increíble y desafiante, y ciertamente con la ayuda de muchos de los aquí presentes, hoy podremos mantener su espíritu y legado vivos. Juntos podemos lograr esa tarea. Una tarea que informará a las generaciones futuras sobre la rica cultura del barrio y la importancia de la vida y obra de HIram Maristany como fotógrafo, activista y defensor de la cultura boricua, de quiera que soy, de quiera que esté ahora mismo, pero especialmente la cultura del barrio. Gracias.
Marta Moreno Vega, founder of the Caribbean Culture African Diaspora Institute, unfortunately couldn't be here with us today, but she sent a video sharing some of her dearest memories of HIram.
Moreno Vega, celebrating his spirit. I had the honor of knowing Hiram for better than 50 years, and too many experiences to fit into 3 minutes. I will say this: if you're talking about a person of character, if you're talking about a person of honor, if you're talking about a person of respect, if you're talking about a person that you know will be a friend forever, that's Hiram Memorial. Because he did not select his friends easily. And when he did, it was because he believed in you and trusted you, and you trusted in him. So all that incredible spirit that it has been an honor to know for 50 years. Well, I guess the strong piece when we came to discover Africans, New Rican, we came to Louisa, and we went to the and we didn't know what we were looking for. So when Hiram started shooting, he said, "Well, what do you want? What do you think?" And so probably a record of 50 years ago of Louisa and Ponce look to the collection of Hiram Memorial. Thank Melinda Maldonado for making him reveal his collection. I also thank Miguel Luciano for making him reveal the collection of the Young Girls Party, because Hiram was very careful about how he put his work out. And the fact that he trusted them to do the work and put the work out speaks to them as well as speaks to his genius and his intelligence and his bravery. Because the work we did 50 years ago, brave, and it's still brave because it gives that forward. Well, the legacy he leaves is one of standing by and believing. Hiram loved El Barrio, loved being Puerto Rican, loved being a Black Puerto Rican. So the fact is that he was passionate about being who he was. He was. El Barrio was his love. And I would tell him, I leave El Barrio, you know, we're getting at a certain age, we need the heat. And he was like, I'm not leaving El Barrio. And El Barrio, I'm glad to say, with this homenaje, is not leaving him. So thank you.
Active in the cultural and political movements of the New York Puerto Rican community, Hiram became a founding member of the Young Lords Party in 1969, as the group's official photographer in capturing some of its most iconic actions. In remembrance of Hiram's justice, we invite to the and Feliciano, co-founders of the New York chapter of the Young Lords Party.
Okay, I'm going to start this introduction, and I was asked by two women to convey some comments and their memories. So I'm going to start my introduction, and then I'll go back to my comments in a minute. Anita, Pablo, to the family members present, to the many childhood friends of Hiram Maristany, welcome. I'm glad that they put a Pedro Petri before, because I also would like to include Pedro Petri, who was a friend of Hiram, not just a friend, but they were both artists. Just like that. Memory that I'm going to read is by a childhood friend of, spent 20 years in jail. I say she spent 20 years in jail so that we can continue to be Puerto Ricans.
This is a statement from Dulce Pagan. After my 20-year revolutionary sabbatical, I spent my first night walking through our community, El Barrio, with my buddy, HIram Memorial. He wanted me to know how our community had changed, what had happened while I was gone. HIram and I grew up half a block from each other. I lived on Madison Avenue, 111th Street, between 111th and 110th, and he lived on 111th between Madison and Park. I attended St. Cecilia's, he attended Commander Shea, our annex. We became friends on the block. As time passed, we bumped shoulders as I went shopping in La Marqueta with my mother. We would say hello and smile, and that was it. He wanted me to know the truth of what he had experienced, just like he documented every activity in the streets with his critical photographic eye. We laughed and we remembered our experiences. You see, HIram was the documentary photographer at El Barrio, and at the times, many people didn't recognize it. He covered all that happened on a daily basis, kids playing on the streets or hanging out, community demonstrations for better education, housing, police brutality. If it was jumping, HIram was there. The evening was like a living, walking album. He made strides to the new buildings, the operations our people had endured. He wasn't known. Things had changed. Many of our childhood friends had moved on or died. Many white people in the community due to gentrification. The barrio didn't have that barrio spunk. HIram had not changed. He continued with his critical mind and creative eye of capturing community life and struggles. He documented all actions of the young lords and became their official photographer. He utilized my family's album for his first exhibit at the Museo del Barrio. In freedom, no matter when I went to a barrio community event, with and Burgos, the lunch or dinner at La Fonda, official office in El Barrio. He ran with his soft pace, smiled, and always came over with his loving hug. We had a true connection of spirit. Now one can visit this for his art. Please do me a favor. Whenever you see HIram's created visions of community, please don't define it as cute. Real artists. HIram artists are ever like our friendship. Gracias for being alive. You were able to picture real experience. That is history. Te amo, querido hermano y compañero. Tu hermana siempre Dulce Pagan. Viva Puerto Rico libre y nuestra patria no se vende. The next one I'd like to read is from the first woman member of the Young Lords and African American Women, member of Denise Oliver Velez. My deepest condolence to HIram's family. My life was enriched by meeting him. HIram showed me the barrio through the lens of joy and not stereotypical portrait painted of East Harlem from the outside. I had him over 6 years of Rio La Sociedad Albizu Campos and Young Lords. He would remain an honored friend and a big brother always. Denise Oliver Velez. So now I come back to mine. My sincere gratitude to the individuals, institutions, and organizations that organized this event. It's a humbling honor to have been invited to share my memories with HIram. I'd also like to thank young lords that traveled to be a president from Chicago, from Florida, from West Virginia, and even as far as Sea Island. You know, most people don't like to get Maristany for a moment. HIram was God and daily sacrifice. He lived his life in the service of others. It takes a particular kind of person to want to document their environment, somehow understanding that the physical present is to be different in the future. I am very happy that HIram captured our community before it was sold out to real estate interests. The soundtrack of HIram's life, I think everybody would agree, is the famous did it my way. And he sure did. Hiram was a member of the Young Lords. His assignment was the free breakfast program, which not only meant getting up early 5 days a week and rounding up the children, but also embracing the community along with Jaja for donations. Together, they had a compelling and convincing narrative, and we were always well stocked. He served his community with humility and pride. Although the Young Lords existed for a couple of 3 years, Hiram lived a life of consistency, providing guidance to the East Harlem board members of the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone. His activism spanned 6 years. The Bible says that no prophet is accepted in his hometown by his or her relatives, his people, the world, and even by the people who call themselves God's children. According to Eddie Palmieri, a critic is an unqualified nuisance. You come to review Hiram's photographs. How many photographs have you taken? You come to review Eddie Palmieri's compositions. How many compositions have you written? Well, some didn't consider Hiram an artist. Today, with the preponderance of recognition from the institutions that honor artists, from the Museo del Barrio to across the street to the Museum of the City of New York, to Celery, who made a statement basically saying that he was one of the 5 or top important photographers of the last half of the 20th century. MoMA and the Smithsonian, Hiram is a Puerto Rican artist, a master photographer. For those of us who knew him intimately, that's all he wanted, to be recognized as an artist and be respected. In the last period of time, he accepted his notoriety in the same manner that he served his community, with a deep sense of responsibility and humility. Hiram was a photographer of the Young Lords, documenting everything. He was our Alberto Diaz Gutierrez, known as Coda. Coda used to carry around 12, 15 rolls of Kodak films. Kodak also is the one who documented the Cuban Revolution and is the author of the iconic Che photo. Hiram was our Coda. He gave us many gifts in his life, and right up until the end, he gifted us by calling people in the last days. He would tell people that he wasn't going to make it, calling with a feeding tube, barely understandable, to say farewell. Rarely do we have the opportunity to say goodbye to loved ones as we transition. I believe that gift is reserved for people like Hiram, who gave of themselves selflessly, those who have a deeper understanding of love and humanity. They said that death comes in threes, and many of us are mourning and celebrating the life of 3 exceptional people: Hiram Maristany, Ricardo Alarcón Caseda, one of the architects of the Cuban Revolution, and Kathy Bodine, a member of the Weather Underground, all within 30 days of each other. In closing, the next time in front of a Hiram Maristany black and white image, look for the brilliant hues of colors, as you would find in the Trujillo or the paint. Listen to the pulsating sounds you will hear from Tito and Nacho. There is movement and sound in his images. My dear brother, Hiram Maristany, you made a difference. You touched many hearts. You inspired souls. You encouraged minds and made a difference, telling our story with your camera. As you said, we don't have to look outside of ourselves for excellence, and you are a shining example of that excellence. Make no doubt, I am the better person for having crossed paths with you in this mystery called life. Thank you for the lessons. On behalf of the Young Lords family, our community, our people, we wish that your spirit, RIP, rest in power. Un fuerte abrazo revolucionario. Thank you.
I don't know why he chose us. We didn't choose him, he chose us. He was already a man. He was married, had a Volkswagen. In fact, it was Hiram who brought some of the Lords to Chicago so that we could form a chapter. Can you imagine if he didn't have that car? He was always very serious. I don't think he ever was a child. And when I found out about him, he never was. He had to become very, very, he did something to you. When you're not allowed to jump up in the street, he just wasn't allowed to do that. He was into sports, but he was always very much a man. Now, in those days, ladies, the concept of manhood was very different. It meant you stood up for your family, it meant you stood up for your community, and certainly stood up for yourself. And I would hope that we would remember that as we move to our incarnations, our incantations of what it is to be man. He knew that at one point, youth, because he loved them, would come and ask about what was my mother like, what was my grandmother like, what was my great-grandmother like. And he took those pictures so that you could see who we were. We were not defeated. We did not go around, ay Dios mío, we were not the kind of people. In fact, we confronted God. I saw hundreds of times in this barrio where people would confront injustice, confront it, and all of them would come out. Everybody knows you hit one Puerto Rican, you got to hit the whole block. Now, I loved him because he was a man of character. I've known him all my life. He knew me all my life. I knew his mother. He knew my mother. He knew all my brothers and sisters. He knew all my kids and all of their mothers. Cállate. He loved you. He loved their customs, their culture, and he had to ask out. Sometimes living in your own sin, you forget. Sometimes as I walk through the streets feeling a little dejected, never allow me to act basely. I wanted to. He said, no. You are chairman of the Young Lords. You must never act that way. And there were times I really wanted to kill people. I don't believe that Puerto Rican. I believe that sometimes the best answer to social injustice. Now, he showed beauty, honesty, and reflected his love through the photography. He was also very, very honest. And he demanded loyalty. Do not say something to HIram that you're going to do and then don't do it. He would remember it for years. I had a picture he wanted, and I said, I don't storage. He said, then get it for me. It's like hundreds of boxes in this place. He said, I'm not going to give you the picture you want. And he didn't. One day, we were sitting down with Bobby Seale, and we were doing some pictures. Bobby was in shock because HIram said, please keep quiet. Move this way. Move that way. This is the chairman of the Black Panther Party. I said, I don't care. No importa. Tell him this. HIram said, who is this Negro? I said, that's HIram Memorial, man. So he did. He ended up liking him a lot. Folks, if there's anything we should take from HIram Memorial, is always be about yourselves. Now, there was always an insecurity because he was shorter than most people, so he had to be better. And his way of showing strength is he would grab your hand. I don't know how many of you remember this. And he said, how are you doing? He grabbed your hand, and while you was dying from the pain, how do you feel? How do you feel, man? You all right? And if out of ego and pride, you didn't respond, your hand ended up white. And then he would let you go. He's extremely strong. The little known secret is that he immortalized us. The Young Lords would not be known as much for things if he had not taken pictures of it. The TB truck, the People's Church, Lincoln Hospital, he took pictures of those things because in the end, pictures are much more poignant and much more attractive than any of the rhetoric that we have. They'll tell you what's happened. People love pictures, and to this day, kids are into that. I just wish that he had taken more videos, but what he did was immortalized us. And we have a great deal of gratitude. What I also loved about Hiram is that he never saw a disconnect between Puerto Rico and New York. That's important because some of us go to Puerto Rico with guilt. Guilt for what, man? We had to come here. We didn't want to go. We didn't want to come here. We had to go. But he had never allowed people to put him down for that. He never allowed people to run the anti-blackness game on him. He told them to their faces, I'm a black Puerto Rican and I'm proud of it. And I loved him for that. I just didn't know when he was young he had good hair. Whenever I go to the breakfast program, usually late, and I would come in with all huff and puff. I was the chairman. He said, do me a favor, give me 25 push-ups, man. I said, Hiram, I was out fighting. He said, I don't care what you were doing. Give me 25. He was that kind of person. He meant it. So, of course, I'd give him 25 or 50, whatever he demanded. He was just a wonderful person. And let me tell you something. Most of the street guys that we knew, going to was Robles, all those were there because of Hiram. And they were going to hire him when they had problems with our leadership. He was just a wonderful, wonderful connection. All of our families were connected on the streets. So they kept him from getting into trouble. They also kept me from getting into trouble. I don't know how it is that he befriended me and I befriended him. I had just come out of jail. I was full of piss and anger. Hiram, he always said, I'm not that tough. But I did everything he didn't do. But he said, you got something, man. You got something. And I always admired him. Do you know what it is to be married and have children and have that responsibility and be a young boy? Unbelievable. I can't see Hiram with the boba in his mouth. I can't see him with a boba in his mouth. A pacifier. He had a camera. That was his pacifier. Folks, it's difficult for me to go into La Fonda, the restaurant, and look at those pictures because I remember them vividly. He was always angry that he wasn't recognized. In fact, the place is crowded now, but I remember when he was walking those streets, as someone mentioned just before, broke, unrecognized, and his picture's not up in major galleries. Today, his picture's in La MoMA, in the Museum of Art, Metropolitan Museum of Art, in El Museo, and in the Smithsonian. I want you to remember this. In order to love yourself, you must love your people. I don't understand how there's a disconnect between yourself and your people. There is a Eurocentric concept that you have to divorce yourself from your people and you have to become American before you can become loved. Be careful with the concept. I see it happening all the time. You have to become an individual. Yes, you do. But you must never lose your faith and your hope and the promise of your people. And even in therapy, when they start that shit, I say, wait a minute, hold up. I don't tell you not to be Italian. I don't tell you not to be Jewish. I don't tell you not to be Irish. Don't you dare tell me that I can't be Puerto Rican and I can't feel what it is to be Puerto Rican. The new thing is to tell kids you're of Puerto Rican descent. What the hell does that mean? You're of Puerto Rican descent. ¿Qué es eso? Do you see Italians running around saying, I'm of Italian descent? I'm of Jew. No, you are Puerto Rican. And I don't care if your mama's Puerto Rican and your father's Puerto Rican and your mom. I don't care if you're Puerto Rican. Sammy Davis is Puerto Rican. Y ya. Reggie Jackson is Puerto Rican. I don't care how you look at it. You part of us. And don't deny it because I'm going to smack you. All right. Alita, Pablito, I hope that one day you take those ectochromes that he has in his house and you publish them in a huge gallery. Because in them you will see Eddie Palmieri, Charlie Palmieri, Machito, Ray Barreto, all of the people of El Barrio, all the hustlers. He remembered the street people. There are times we get so uppity, so sedidly, as they say down south, that we don't want to admit that there are people who are on the other side. Those people who you cop them anyway, those people are wonderful people. I don't understand how people decide they don't. My sister tells me, well, why are you always hugging those people? Because I love them. Simple as that. And they protected me more times than not. It was those people who kept me out of jail after I came out. No, eso no se hace. So, folks, remember who you are. Remember to be proud. Remember that you're the most beautiful, courageous, but there's no people more beautiful than us. No people. We're smart, we're intelligent, we're creative. And what we have to learn to do, I end with this, is to kick butt. Listen to me, Puerto Ricans, and all the others, because we had many people in our party. 1/3 of the party was black, by the way. I want to let you know that. We have Faisal here, Muntu. Many of them were black, and they believed as much in Puerto Rico and in the independence of Puerto Rico as we did. Never allow people who are not Puerto Rican not to come into your organization. You never know who's going to help you. You never know. Be careful, though, the agents all over. I'm serious. Be careful. Sometimes it's not the white boy. Sometimes it's the very poor who you're right next to que está hablando mierda. And who's informing. They had a $50,000 contract down on me. When I went to the mob on First Avenue, we'll find out who it is, but it's not us. Turns out to be the hustlers on 100 who wanted me dead because we were making it too hot for them. Hiram knew about this because Hiram knew them all. I love him. It took me a long time to come back to normalcy after he died. It's going to take me a long time not to remember the arguments we had incessantly. Él era como un piojo. He would stay on you, stay on you, stay on you. I love him dearly. And I would hope that those of you who are now beginning to organize remember that men can love men. We're not talking about battle. Men in battle love each other in a way that's ridiculous. Pi's here, David's here, Faisal's here, several others are here, Mickey's here. The love that we have, regardless of the problem, is so deep. Come forward just to honor Hiram Maristany. May his memory live forever. May you remember one man in this community who loved you even when you didn't love yourself. And with gentrification happening the way it is, I thank God that at least we have a corner named after him. So, folks, remember who you are. When you walk out of this place today and walk among the Central Park folk, just know this is mine. This is mine. I own this. You have to feel that way in order to achieve power. It's going to get rough in this country. And there are going to be times that Latinos are going to be looked askance as they deal only with black and white. Bullshit. You don't look at me, you ain't got no war. You ain't got no organization. Remember that we are Ricans. Remember that we're Rican with pride. And remember that there's one thing that we have to remember forever and forever. Que viva Puerto Rico libre!
At the core of El Museo del Barrio since its founding, who sat a cold, darkened basement.
And we were talking about building a museum, and we asked, who knows anything about the museums? And everybody looked and said, I don't know.
Hiram Memorial was among the museum's early directors, and in time, he helped build one of the nation's leading Latino cultural institutions.
We were bringing our best to train our children.
He's also an acclaimed photographer.
Well, this is the center of El Barrio.
He was born and raised just a few blocks away. What is El Barrio to you?
El Barrio is where I grew up. It's what I know. It's what I'm comfortable doing. It's my home.
From the moment he picked up a camera, Maristany was rebelling against the narrative of how Puerto Ricans and Latinos were treated.
Most of us were when we were handcuffed. Most of us were engaged in some kind of act of violence or an act of violence against us. So I was very, very angry about that. And I was also very naive, but I thought that I could balance it. I could give a different representation of it. And I could show us that we're not that, we are this. And I'm still at it.
Maristany first picked up a camera in 1959 while still a teenager and dedicated the next 6 decades documenting the life, history, culture, and beauty of his neighborhood. To speak on his lasting impact on the art world, Miguel Luciano, artist, and Carmen Ramos, Chief Curatorial and Conservation Officer at the National Gallery of Art.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Miguel Luciano. I'm an artist here at Barrio. I've had the honor and the privilege of collaborating with Hiram on several projects in recent years. He first invited me to work with him in an exhibition entitled Anchor at the Hunter East Harlem Gallery. It was an exhibition where a younger generation of artists were invited to explore and respond to Hiram's archive for the first time. 2018, 2019, we collaborated on this public art project entitled Mapping Resistance, the Young Lords in El Barrio. We took 10 of Hiram's photos of the Young Lords and enlarged them into billboard-sized images at the same locations where the history took place 50 years ago. El Museo del Barrio was a partner in that project, and today you can still see a couple of these images on the streets today. One of them is on 111th Street in Lexington on Young Lords Way. You can see the Bronx March there, right across the street from the People's Church. The project was centered on 111th Street because a lot of the history took place in and around 111th. But it's also the street that Hiram was born and raised on. So I'm very excited that they'll soon be renaming 111th Street between Park and Madison after Hiram Maristany and his sister Carmen. That's right, give it up. And a shout out to Debbie Quinones and everybody who's been helping to make that happen. I'm so proud of that. We spent so much time on that street, just walking the street, talking about the history, setting this project up. With Mapping Resistance, we really wanted to teach this activist history forward to another generation and to reclaim our history at a time when gentrification is really threatening to erase it. Many of the buildings that were on the streets in Hiram's photos don't exist anymore. So we sometimes hung banners on the fences where buildings once stood. In the spring, wild vines had covered some of the fences, and purple flowers began to bloom every morning around Hiram's photos. As you know, purple was the color of the Young Lords. It was incredibly beautiful, something divine that we never could have planned, but this project was kind of magical in this way every day. We put Hiram's images back in the same streets where the history took place, and he loved that about this project. That the images returned directly to the people and to the community that helped shape this history and inspire this history. It wasn't made for a museum, it was made for the public. People could get close, they could touch the work and interact with it. Walking tours, and people in the neighborhood often involved by telling their own stories about this history, and pointing themselves out in Hiram's photos, like this walking tours, regularly things like this happen. It was beautiful. All of this reminds us that this is a living history, that we are still here, and that El Barrio is still very Puerto Rican. Hiram's work allows us to see ourselves, to know our history, and to be proud of who we are. He lived and worked in his own community, constantly inspired by his love for El Barrio, with his lens focused on the beauty and the power of everyday people. Our most recent collaboration was a two-person exhibition entitled Joy, Play, and Resistance. It just closed yesterday at the Binghamton University Art Museum. We've been working on it for almost 2 years, and we're in the final stages of planning it when Hiram passed. It's a show that focused on joy and play as their own forms of power and resistance. And it combined our works together, photography and sculpture, in a celebration of our love of our community, our love for Puerto Rico, our love and respect for each other as artists. It was a really beautiful show, and I know that Hiram was there in spirit. A catalog is coming out soon, and it'll be one of the very few publications to feature Hiram's works in print. And that's important. We need a book of Hiram's work. We need a Museo del Barrio to do a book of Hiram's work. Yes. We're also working on another project, a part of our project, Metropolitan Hospital debut 2024. And I'm very proud that this will be a permanent public art featuring some of Hiram's most iconic images of El Barrio. In recent years, Hiram was finally starting to receive the recognition that he's always deserved. His work was just featured in the Greater New York Show at MoMA PS1, and the Whitney Museum of American Art just acquired several of his photographs for their permanent collection. When he passed, curators and arts professionals reached out from some of the most important museums in this country, from the Smithsonian to the National Gallery of DC to MoMA and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Hiram was a very dear friend and a very dear mentor as well, and I miss him a lot. His legacy will really live on through his powerful work in archive and through his children, Pablo and Alita, and through the many, many artists that he's inspired for generations to come. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored to be here. I'm E. Carmen Ramos, Chief Curator at the National Gallery of Art. And I met Hiram around 2015 when I was actively expanding the photography collection at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. At the time, Hiram was very skeptical of my interest and affiliation with a large mainstream institution. And I think you've had those kinds of experiences. And I understood his hesitation as generational. He was raised in a context of structural poverty and racism, which was a foundational experience for many Puerto Ricans in New York. And he also came of age as an artist of color at a time when they were routinely rejected, ignored, and sidelined by mainstream culture institutions. I often refer to these experiences as a kind of PTSD. And I've experienced it many, many times before in my ongoing engagement with Latinx artists. I never took his skepticism personally, and I continue to cultivate our relationship. I grew to love Hiram, to deeply respect and advocate for his work, and to understand his photography as a turning point in the depiction of Puerto Rican life in the United States. There are a couple of phrases that I associate closely with Hiram as he understood his own work. One, that his photographs reflected a love affair with his community of El Barrio. And two, that he portrayed Puerto Ricans not defined by their poverty. As hard as it is to believe, Hiram cultivated this vision since he was a teenager. Between 1963 and 1964, Hiram became a media sensation, profiled in a New York Times article, which featured his photography, and in the NBC documentary Manhattan Battleground. His comments reveal that he didn't ignore the oppressive urban conditions that Puerto Ricans inherited and did not create, but that he chose to see the ways Puerto Ricans had agency in spite of racism. He said, to quote, to live and have a place to go. There's a lot of pain and a lot of sorrow. Underneath, there's a lot of glory, happiness, and love, end quote. Hiram's photographs are not simple documentary images. They define and challenge the rampant invisibility and distortion of Puerto Rican and Latinx life within American culture, in effect, transcending stereotypes with joy. While Hiram's Young Lord photography has deservedly received a lot of attention, I was first drawn to his El Barrio pictures, many of which were taken before the Young Lords. These pictures are radical in what they achieve. They are important because they center us, our experience, our lives. They allow us to have a space of happiness and cultural tradition. They see beauty in our humility, our blackness, our queerness, our ability to fight back. An image of a group of people selecting secondhand clothes by the sunlight becomes a classical, epic, and resilient story. I'm grateful that Hiram's final years brought him acclaim, but we still have so much to do to really interrogate his art. May this be one of the many events that continue to honor his legacy. Thank you.
Susana Torruella Levan, Director Emerita and former Executive Director of Museo del Barrio, and artist Alaudin Yula couldn't be here with us today, but they have shared heartfelt messages about the importance of Hiram's work.
Buenos días. I'm Susana Torruella Levan, Director Emerita of El Museo del Barrio. And I want to thank El Museo for allowing me the opportunity to join all of you here to honor a great human being, a great man, and a great artist, HIram Memorial. I want to give a special thanks to who really is responsible for allowing Hiram to enjoy and accomplish the great things he did in the last 6 years of his life. We are here because we are Hiram's passions, his passion for his people, su gente, el barrio, his love of El Museo, his love of the Young Lords movement. And his mother said to him, he told me it was the highest praise he got, is that she said, you see the beauty in everybody else. He also had, and that's what I would like to speak about today, is some other important passions for art and for the art of photography specifically. He seized every opportunity that he got to become, and the opportunities came very early on, to become a great photographer. And believe me, the odds were against him. El Barrio then was very different. It was a violent place full of dangers for a young Puerto Rican. It was a place of drugs and gangs, and they were always out. And 111th Street was one of the worst places. And Hiram, in fact, described it as a war zone. Where, in fact, the rooftops were the only safe places. So think of that, those lyrical, beautiful images that we see of kids flying kites, or his view of 111th from the rooftop. Those were, they were refuges. He was escaping the street, the dangers of the street. Now, I'd like to run you through a chronology of Hiram's fascinating history with photography itself. At age 10, he would walk from 111th Street to the Met at 85th and 5th Avenue to roam through the galleries. And he was 10, and his father had died that year. And so the Met became God's own him, and led him around. At age 13, he was a very important person in his life. A social worker called Dan Morrow, who spent 5 years coming back and forth from Massachusetts to El Barrio. And he noticed Hiram's love of photography, and it's not clear whether he gave him a camera, but Hiram had a very simple 35 millimeter camera, and it was Merle who first explained the basics of how photography works. Then, 2 years later, a magnum photographer called Bob Enrique created again, he was working in El Barrio and noticed Hiram's hanging around because he loved photography. And he was going away. You know that magnum photographers do photojournalist travels. And so he was going away for 6 weeks, and he left him his Leica. He left it to Hiram and said, take pictures. And in it was a roll, just one roll inside that camera, but they were $1 each. And so that was a fortune then. And also, Hiram was so responsible, you can imagine, with what care he took that roll. And when he came back, he loved the pictures so much, Bob Enrique did, that he gave him that camera, which was a Leica, and it was the first professional camera that Hiram had. Later that year, Hiram actually bought his own first professional camera, a Nikon F, and it cost him the huge amount of $368, which he told me he paid in singles. Another important activity of Hiram's at this time during his teenage was that he used to go to the 110th Street branch of the library and read photography manuals. Now, if you've ever read a photography manual, you got an award from me. Anyway, that combination of by a very young age, he was a master technician. Because he felt first of all, he loved abstract knowledge, and secondly, the question of the technique, he felt he had to master before he could go on to make art. Now, he had some very interesting teachers. He took a master class at the School of Visual Arts with Alexei Brodovich, who was the master designer and the art director of Harper's Bazaar, which, as you remember, was one of the most avant-garde magazines. And then he had the two great African-American directors, photographers, and Gordon Parks became his mentors. From the early to the mid-70s were the two great passions of Hiram's life came to full fruition. One was his work at El Museo del Barrio, and the other was his participation in the Young Lords movement. He always said El Museo was my school, and Marta Vega, who was then director, was his great mentor, who saw his talent, immediately hired him as El Museo's photographer, and most importantly, taught him about using his art as self-empowerment, as a proof of his self-identity, as a proof of learning about his own culture and identity. So she was all important in his life at this time. And forgive me, I forgot to say that Marta was director of El Museo then. And then the Young Lords, Hiram was the oldest member of the Young Lords and its official photographer. And he said that the Young Lords movement was so important because it was the first time that Puerto Ricans stood up against prejudice, violence, and brutality that surrounded them in El Barrio. And he felt that the whole movement was a coming of age where street kids really became young citizens as part of the city. he felt the work for Bill and the young lords proceeded apace and was the same kind of work about self-pride, self-respect, and empowerment. So the next time you look at a HIram Maristany photograph, look at its beauty. Also, of course, look at its story, his love for El Barrio and its people, but also look at the beauty of the photograph itself, how he composes, how he balances light and dark, how he finds the perfect moment. And you know, Hiram's mother was correct. He saw the beauty and the love in El Barrio. The beauty was all around him. The love was in his heart. Thank you, Hiram.
I'm Aladdin Eula. I'm a comedian, actor, and playwright. And I met Hiram Maristany. It's kind of a funny story. In the 70s, when I was in kindergarten, first, second, or third grade, I'm not sure, but around that time period, we used to go out and go to different places to see art, but also to kind of learn art. And PS 171, I think at the time, they had like a lot of hippies and liberals that were working there. So they wanted us to really experience art. So I remember on 3rd Avenue, like around, when it was like 107th or 108th on 3rd Avenue, they had El Museo, which was, I think, a storefront. So we would go there, and there would be this man that would greet us with other people. And I remember Hiram, because Hiram, I don't know what it is, but when you would meet him, you knew he was from the hood. You know he was from East Harlem. So he would shake our hands and whatnot, and they would give speeches about art. And at that age, I was like really rejecting. I was like, I'm not an artist. I play ball. And I think Hiram, kind of got irritated. And I know we spoke about this later. He had asked, like, what do you really want to do? And I was like, listen, I know what I want to do in my life. I'm going to be catcher for the Yankees. If that doesn't work out, I'm going to play point guard for the Knicks. And if that doesn't work out, I'm going to be a quarterback for the Jets and the Giants. So he gave me that look. He never forget that look. He's like, just take the crayons. So that's probably my first memory of Hiram. And Hiram was passionate about photography. And a lot of students will tell you who study with Hiram, even when you're kids, like back then, photography was different. You had to develop it, and you had to like learn it in a bag and learn how to mix the chemicals. And if you didn't have the timer on, he was like, "Why you have the timer on? Put the timer on." Yes, Mr. Maristany. So he was tough, but tough love is what he had. So I had lost touch with Hiram for decades, and then like around 2012 or 2013. I was starting to work on my film in search of Bengali about the first wave of Bengalis that came to East Harlem, married Puerto Ricans and African Americans. Just getting some early B-roll stuff of archives of East Harlem. I was trying to get old black and white footage. So I met Hiram at a coffee shop on 100th Street up the big hill on Lex. So I had my laptop, right, and I was showing him this footage of a segment from like 62 or 63, early 60s, and it was about the social worker. And there was a segment there with a who lost his camera and then go to the pawn shop and he's distraught over losing his camera. When I met that clip, and I said, Hiram, do you know who that little kid is? I'd like to meet him. It was such a moving experience. I'd like to just know his whereabouts. He's like silent for 2 minutes. I'm like, yo, Hiram, I don't know if he's in jail or whatever or what happened, but I promise I'll keep this private. Can I just meet him? I know you know him. And like another 2 minutes go by, and Hiram's really emotional. And I'm looking at him like, what's going on? And it dawned on me, that little kid is Hiram Maristany. And it kind of made me look at Hiram differently because you could tell how much that kid loves photography. And Hiram grew into this person that like photography was passion. And, there's other communities like, New Jersey has a Mary Baraka. They have poet laureates. They have artists who are given all these medals by the president. But I feel like Hiram is like East Harlem's photography laureate. He wore it in his heart. And I always get emotional because he would always say, you don't need to ask me no questions. Just look at my photos. My photos are who I am. And it's funny because, like in exhibits, when the New York Times or industry people wanted to talk to me, you say, I don't want to talk to them. They want to know about me? Look at my photography. Like, that's what a real artist is. And it's kind of funny because, as an artist, you want the New York Times. You want these industry people. And I was told by, family members that that's how he was back in the day. It was all about the work. And when I started to get into filmmaking, I would joke to Hiram, Hiram, I never went to film school. I don't know how to shoot. But whatever you're doing, I want to learn, how do you capture that? I'm going to go to a country, Bangladesh, where I'm going to try and shoot people with a camera, and they're going to shoot me back with real bullets, because it's a third world country that's run by Muslim extremists. And we would always say, be in the moment, capture the people in their essence. Don't ask them to pose. You don't even necessarily have to talk to them. Catch them in their element. And when you look at Hiram's photography, I think he caught the heart, the ethos, the pain, the joy of East Harlem. And I think that's what's so beautiful about his photography. And Hiram could be very cantankerous. If you caught him on a wrong day, he'd curse you out. But when you would talk to him, he was a master technician. He could tell you about the aperture. He could tell you about the camera. He could tell you about the model of a camera. He could tell you about what camera to get. He could tell you about how to even find the best hookups for the prices in New York. But when he talked about photography, he would tell you about the poetry in the ghetto, poetry in the people who were struggling, and he would give them a dignity and a voice like no other photographer. And I think that's what I'm going to miss the most about Hiram, is his integrity, because you can't buy that kind of integrity and that kind of commitment to art. And Hiram was such a loyal friend. Like I said, he may not tell you what you wanted to hear, but he tell you what you needed to hear. And there'll never be another person like that. And I think East Harlem owes a lot to the legacy of arts in that community, because when I grew up, he was my hero, because I know this is one person that was capturing art in its true essence. And he was from East Harlem. He's from 112th. You can see him on 102nd. He was part of us. He was the fabric, the heart, the soul of what it was to be an artist. And, I almost feel like sometimes I'm going to get a phone call from Hiram. He's going to say, what's all this talking about? I'm right around the corner. What are you talking about? Stop crying. What's wrong with you? that would be Hiram, that tough love, And, I miss him so much, because he represents that integrity and that soul and that unconditional love that you don't get from anyone else.
Please welcome Hiram Maristany's son, Pablo Maristany, for some parting words and his eulogy.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here in the program. After his impassioned speech, enough, so I'm going to be reading Hiram's eulogy after these words. I thought a lot about what to say today about my father, and a few words come to mind. The first would be dedication and obviously honor and morality. Hiram was fiercely dedicated to a set of morals and principles, and if anybody ever tried to violate them, he would defend them with fire. A lot of people here know that Hiram could be a prickly personality, as it was said, or be defensive. And, that was because he was introduced to betrayal at a very young age. We all saw in that clip from Manhattan Battleground that his camera was taken from him, but eventually returned. That engendered in him a mistrust. It was very hard to gain Hiram's trust, because he was protecting something that was priceless, something that was precious. He considered himself a custodian of history, of culture, and one of the things that was most important to him was a historically accurate account of things that had passed. Hiram wanted nothing more than for his community and his people to know how things were as they were, unadulterated, without any colorful imagery. And he liked to let his photography speak as opposed to him, even though he loved to tell stories. But he was very protective, right? Hiram built up a lot of barriers around himself to keep him safe from betrayal. And from the outside, it may have seemed that Hiram was obsessed with his own work, but it turns out he was obsessed with the subjects of his work. The focus was the people in it, his family, his community, his friends, and his peers that he loved so dearly. And he was being protective of that, not necessarily himself. Hiram liked the dark. He didn't want the spotlight on him. He preferred to shine the spotlight and other people who he thought more deserving. And he wanted to illuminate his people, his community, and make sure that they were loved and seen and acknowledged, and not necessarily him. He really didn't want it to be about him. I came to understand that Hiram was selfless and not selfish. It was about everybody except him. He was doing this for us. So as we gather here today to honor him, I remember that in shooting, he was honoring all of us, right? He made sure that people saw who we were in a glowing and loving light, never in a negative one. And he made sure that that was very well represented. Hiram had a brush with some health issues a few years ago, and during that time, in one of his darker moments, he left us for a little moment, just a couple of minutes. And when he came back, I was in the hospital room with him, and he told me about his vision of the afterlife. He told me that he and I were seated on top of snow-covered mountaintops, and there were clouds in the sky rolling, and through them was this piercing light from the sun. And he and I were having a debate, as it were, even in heaven, he still liked to debate, about contrast and whether there should be more light or more darkness. And obviously, he liked his images dark. And, I thought it should be a little lighter. And, even at the end, after he had transcended, he was still a fighter. That was his favorite thing to do. He loved to debate and argue with his dear friend Pedro Pedraza. That was his favorite thing to do. But he did it out of love. It was a friendly, loving sparring. He had found in Pedro an intellectual equal and someone who he could, discuss things with and match up against him and really challenge him. And, I witnessed a lot of that. I was privileged to record some of it. So I want to thank you, Pedro, for your friendship for Hiram and for fighting with him and encouraging him to do all the things that he would not have done otherwise. He needed you behind him to push him forward to offer all these gifts to us that he did eventually. There are a few other people present here today who I would like to thank, first and foremost being my mother, Gwendolyn Lorraine Maristany. I'd like to thank you. I want to thank you for your patience, almost infinite patience. I want to thank you for your understanding and for your acceptance of who Hiram was and who he had to be. He couldn't really be anyone else. And, it was a tough job for you to be his wife and to accept all of that. And I thank you for that. Now, I'd like to thank my sister, Eulogy for being the daughter that Hiram deserved, for being present on every birthday, every Father's Day, all of the cards, all the Christmas cards telling him he was the best dad in the world, doing all the things for him that I couldn't do as his son. His expectations of me were different. So, I'm fortunate that you did that for him and he felt that love from you. I'd like to thank Miguel Luciano for his undying commitment and friendship. I couldn't do it without you, man. Really. He's been a godsend to me and my entire family in getting us through this process and making it go as smoothly as possible. I want to thank Arden Sherman, who's present here today, Hiram's creator at Anchor, at the Hunter East Harlem Gallery. That was a special event because it kind of brought me back into Hiram's life. We had been estranged several different times throughout our life, but as his work ramped back up, he would reach out to be more open, and he wanted me to be around to see this. And so I did, and I told Arden that she gave my father back to me. She put us back in touch and, restored that bond, so I'm forever grateful to you, and thank you for being here. About Hiram's work, it goes back to the analogy of the snow-covered mountains and the beams of light piercing through the clouds. It was all about light, right? Focus on development. He wanted to shine his light on the people that he loved, the people that he valued, and made sure that they were bathed in that light, that it was a glowing light, and that they were loved and well represented, because he did love them very personally. If you look at any of these images that he took, you can see in the eyes of subjects, that they're not looking at the camera. They were his people, they were his friends, and there was no disconnect between them. There was no posturing, there was no posing as Aladdin mentioned. It was all about authenticity and mutual love from one end of his lens to the other. Hiram brought me with him when he did a lot of these things. I was present in this very building when Maristany was doing it, and I was only 11 years old, but I helped him do that, and Hiram brought me with him. And it was an invaluable experience, but I didn't know it at the time because I was only 11 years old. He brought me backstage at Celia Cruz concerts. He introduced me to Tito Puente and to Machito. He even brought me backstage at the 1985 Jackson's Victory Tour, where I met and shook Michael Jackson's hand because one of the security directors was a former Lord up in Meadowlands, and he got us all backstage. He told this story that he wanted my sister and all of her friends to come back there to meet the Jackson 5, but she was too afraid because she was a huge fan, so they didn't go, but I went with him, and I'll never forget it, going back there and seeing the 5 of them and the shining glove and doing it. I mention that just because Hiram was so close to greatness all the time, and all of these stars, and he valued them because they may not have been seen as much as they deserve to be. But there he was, shining his light on other people to make sure that they were seen and not necessarily him. I'm going to read the eulogy now. And I'm really happy I didn't have to follow Felipe speaking because that was a very powerful performance. So here goes. Hiram Sebastian Maristany was born on August 10th, 1945 in East Harlem, New York City, the 6th of 8 children to Reynaldo and Margarita Ruiz Maristany, immigrants from Mayagüez, Puerto Rico. Growing up on 111th Street, Hiram's family included older siblings Carmen, Reynaldo, Negra, Florence, Eric, Ruth, and younger siblings Eudora and Victor. Hiram grew up playing stickball, basketball, and was a Golden Gloves boxer. He was educated in the New York City public and parochial school systems. Hiram often had a serious and authoritative demeanor. He was once described as the bulldog of the family because he took the role of protector to his more defenseless siblings. Nevertheless, Hiram had a loving side. He could be funny, affectionate, supportive, and kind. He enjoyed listening to salsa and Latin jazz, dancing, and playing acoustic guitar. Around the age of 13, Hiram was gifted his first camera by Dan Morrow, a social worker active in East Harlem. Dan became Hiram's mentor, father figure, and someone he emulated, smoking a pipe and playing a guitar just like Dan. Shortly thereafter, Hiram's talent for photography quickly emerged. Through years of study and dedicated practice, he developed mastery of his craft, taking pictures of his community and eventually teaching photography to young people in East Harlem. Teaching photography is how Hiram met Gwendolyn Mitchell, who he later married. Hiram and Gwen had 2 children, Alita and myself, and for over 25 years made their homes in East Harlem and the Bronx. Hiram's deep roots in East Harlem and compassion for his people led to his involvement in the Young Lords Party in the late 1960s. He embraced his role as documentarian and became their photographer. In the years that followed, he would capture many of the most movement. His activism brought exposure to the issues of the time, and he remained focused on those very same issues throughout the duration of his life. Hiram's dedication to his community was unparalleled. He loved to mentor young artists at Hunter College's Center for Puerto Rican Studies, debate photography, and discuss the plight of Puerto Ricans. Hiram loved East Harlem, and in return, East Harlem loved Hiram. He aimed to celebrate those without celebrity, unseen as they went about their daily lives. A merchant at La Marqueta, a carpenter in Mayagüez, a young man holding a rose. Hiram loved to shine his light on those who were overlooked and who toiled away in the shadows. Hiram's passion for the arts continually drove him to uplift his community, leading to his involvement in the formative years of El Museo del Barrio, New York City's premier museum of Latinx art, which he directed for 3 years from 1975 to 77. Hiram was honored to be named an East Harlem Hero in 2018 by the East Harlem Scholars Academy, where the classroom is now named after him as King in El Museo del Barrio's 42nd annual Three Kings Day Parade in 2019. The community also voted to name 111th Street and Madison Avenue after Hiram Maristany, or calling it Hiram Maristany Way. As a lifelong photographer, Hiram produced black and white images, but his life, and even in the darkest of situations, he carried with him a light. He used the light of his spirit to turn the often negative stereotypes of his people into glowing portraits. If Hiram aimed his camera at you, that meant that you were special. That meant he loved you. Hiram will be greatly missed and fondly remembered by all who knew him and loved him. His spirit lives on in his photography. His images are a love letter and a historical archive of his beloved East Harlem. Hiram has 2 children, Alita and me, his grandson, Shay, his sister, Alita, his nieces, nephews, extended family, colleagues, and friends. I'd just like to riff on what Mickey said. On a lot of stones written R.I.P. rest in peace, but all of us will live on, and that for everyone he shot, he granted his soul, that their presence and their spirit will live on beyond their life expectancy, beyond ours. And I look forward to sharing with everyone here today and the broader community the vast wealth of photographic material that Hiram left behind. I can say confidently what he actually shot. Like Martha Moreno Vega said, he shot everything. Familial, community activism. There's so much more to be shared. They're great team because he kept a lot private. He kept a lot safe. And I think now is an appropriate time to open up everyone and offer it to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, mi gente. We invite you to explore the art installation by Adrian Viajero Roman in the lobby dedicated to the artist. Also, you are welcome to visit Las Galerías El Museo, as well as the Museum of the City of New York next door, featuring works by Hiram Maristany on view, all free of charge. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome back Bombayo.
We'd like to dedicate this spelling to our ancestors, Teresa Fortuna, incredibly driven artist and activist, Tito Matos, and of course, Hiram Maristany. Please sing with us. Gracias.
Un bebé para Teresa, un bebé para Matos, un bebé para Maristany, como le gustaba a él. Un bebé para Teresa, un bebé para Matos, un bebé para Maristany, como le gustaba a él. Ay, yo te cantamos, ay, plena, conmigo quiero bailar. Un bebé para Maristany, como le gustaba a él. Un bebé para Teresa, un bebé para Matos, un bebé para Maristany, como le gustaba a él. Conmigo quiero bailar. Un bebé para Maristany, como le gustaba a él. Un bebé para Teresa, un bebé para Matos, un bebé para Maristany, como le gustaba a él. Yo te canto, bailena, yo te canto, un bebé para Maristany, como le gustaba a él. Un bebé para Teresa, un bebé para Matos, un bebé para Maristany, como le gustaba a él. Un bebé para Teresa, un bebé para Ven conmigo, hoy una voz divina que me llamo. Hoy una voz, hoy una voz, hoy una voz divina desde lo que me llamo. No baila la voz más buena, hoy una voz divina que me llamo. Hoy una voz, hoy una voz, hoy una voz divina desde lo que me llamo. En la bomba, ven conmigo, hoy una voz divina que sé lo que me llamo. Hoy una voz, hoy una voz, hoy una voz divina desde lo que me llamo. Ven conmigo, la voz plena, una voz divina que sé lo que me llamo. Una voz, una voz, una voz divina desde lo que me llamo. Hoy una voz, hoy una voz, hoy una voz divina que sé lo que me llamo. Una voz, una voz, hoy una voz divina desde lo que me llamo. Como dice los mulatos, desde lo que me llamo. Que me llamo, desde lo que me llamo. Que me llamo, desde lo que me llamo. Baila goma, baile conmigo. Desde lo que me llamo. Que me llamo, desde lo que me llamo. Que me llamo, desde lo que me llamo. Desde lo que me llamo. Que me llamo, desde lo que me llamo. Baila como baila la buena. Desde lo que me llamo. Que me llamo, 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 desde lo que me llamo. Baila, baila conmigo. Desde lo que me llamo. Que me llamo, desde lo que me llamo. Que me llamo, desde lo que me llamo. Desde lo que me llamo. Baila bomba, baile conmigo. Desde lo que me llamo. Que me llamo, 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 desde lo que me llamo. Hoy una voz, hoy una voz, hoy
lo que me llamo. Soy una voz, soy una voz, soy una voz divina, es lo que me llamo. Baila Oma, baila conmigo, hoy una voz divina, es lo que me llamo. Soy una voz, soy una voz, soy una voz divina, es lo que me llamo. Si uno baila, la voz mañana, hoy una voz divina, es lo que me llamo. Soy una voz, soy una voz, soy una voz divina, es lo que me llamo. Soy una voz, soy una voz, soy una voz divina, que es lo que me llamo. Soy una voz, soy una voz, soy una voz divina, que es lo que me llamo. Soy una voz, soy una voz, soy una voz divina, que es lo que me llamo. Soy una voz, soy una voz, soy una voz divina, que es lo que me llamo. Soy una voz, soy una voz, soy una voz divina, que es lo que me llamo. Soy una voz, soy una voz, soy una voz divina, que es lo que me llamo. Soy una voz, soy una voz, soy una voz divina, que me llamo.
Everyone, please rise.